We've implemented the code to validate the user input in the post array and display error messages if required fields are missing or if there's a problem with the email address. One of the required fields is an image, so that will be in the files array. I'll come back to that later. We're now ready to start building the message body, so let's switch to the code in process.php. And the version that I'm working with is in the chapter 6, 06_03 begin folder. After the code that was created in the previous video, we don't want to go any further if there are errors or missing fields. So the code that creates and sends the message needs to go inside a conditional comment. And we'll add that right down at the bottom of process.php. So we need the conditional statement if not errors and not missing. And to send the emails, we need access to the Swift mailer library. So we need to include config.php. So I'm going to use require once. We're working inside an include file, so we need to use the magic constant to get the current directory of the include file. That's _dir _. Then we concatenate onto the end of that the relative path to what the file that we want, beginning with a /. We're now 3 levels down, so we need to go up 3 levels. Then we can go to the includes folder and config.php. I want to send 2 different versions of the email, one to the person submitting the form as confirmation and the other to the conference organizers. That means using the decorator plugin as described in the previous chapter. Building an HTML message and creating the transport involves a lot of code that's been covered in previous chapters. To save time, I'm going to copy most of it from snippets.txt, which you can find in the begin folder for this video. So let's just switch to snippets.txt, and I'm going to copy from line 1 down to line 12. Then go back to process.php, add in a couple of extra lines after requiring config.php, and then paste in that code. This creates a multi-dimensional array of replacements for the decorator plugin. Each top-level element in the replacements array needs to be an email address. The first one comes from email, the variable email. That's coming from the post array, so that's the email address that is submitted by the form. The second email, I've added secret@foundationphp.com. That's one of my testing addresses. You'll need to change this second one to an account of your own. And each set of replacements contains a placeholder for subject, for greeting, and the greeting uses the name variable, which also comes from the post array, and then also for the paragraph that introduces the photo in the HTML email. The next stage is to initialize the transport and mailer and begin building the message. So let's create a try-catch structure that comes after the replacements array, but inside the conditional statement that begins on line 33. So try, then we need the catch an exception, and then simply display any message that comes from the exception. I've got the code for the transport, mailer, and beginning of the HTML message in snippets.txt, so switch to that and copy from line 16 all the way down to line 53. Go back to process.php, and that code needs to be pasted inside the try block. There's quite a lot of code there, so let's just scroll back up and take a quick look at it. We begin by creating a transport and then the mailer. Then we register the decorator, passing it the replacements array, and then initialize the message, setting the subject using the placeholder from the replacements array. That's followed by a HereDoc string that has the first part of the HTML output. And at the end of the HTML output, on line 85, I'm using the greeting placeholder from the replacements array, and then I've begun an unordered list, and then this is the closing identifier of the here.doc string. Make sure that there is no space on that line before the identifier or anything after the identifier. It must be on a line of its own. So after that closing identifier, add in a couple of extra lines. I'm going to use a loop to build the unordered list from the form data, but first let's initialize a variable to store the plain text version. So I'll just call that text, and it will be an empty string. Add in a couple of extra lines and then go back to snippets.txt and copy the rest of the code from there, line 57 to the end. Go back to process.php and paste that in just before the catch block. This for each loop processes the form data by going through the expected array. The expected array contains the names of each form field that we want to process, and as it goes through the array, it refers to them as item, and on lines 94 and 95, I'm using item as a variable. First to check to see if a form field has been filled in, so if that's set, then I get the value. So the first time that we go through the expected array, item will be name, so that will get the value from the name field. The next time it goes through, it will be from email, get from the email field, and so on. Then on line 96, I create a label, taking the name of the field and replacing any underscores with a space, and then using UC words to capitalize the first letter of each word. The label is added to the HTML. Then this checks to see if the value is an array. If it is an array, it's imploded, it's joined together with a comma and a space between each item, and then the value is added to the end of that list item in the HTML. And finally, we add it to the text version, to the plain text version, using a double quoted string with the escape sequences for a carriage return and new line character. And then at the bottom, we complete the HTML content by having the closing unordered list tag, closing TD, closing TR, and we close the table body and HTML. So that completes building the email message, apart from adding the photo, which we'll do in the next video. We've added a lot of code to process.php, but most of it has been covered in previous chapters, creating the transport and mailer objects, using the decorator plugin, and initializing a message object. The important code here is this for each loop. It gathers the form data and formats it ready to add to the body of the message. Storing the names of the form input fields in the expected array has made it easy to access each field and ensures you don't include data that might have been injected by spoofing the form.